I've thrown together 10 tips and tricks to speed up your coding in Godot. Some of these tips may also reduce the amount of spaghetti present in your code base. Let's get into it. Before we do anything today, what we're going to do is go into our Godot project, go at the top here, editor the settings, search for completion. You'll see here there'll be a code complete delay. By default it's 0.3 seconds. Let's change that to as little as we can, which is 0.01 seconds. You'll thank me later. What this does is it reduces the delay that autocomplete applies. You'll realize how snappy this is when you start typing immediately after, instead of that laggy feeling that you get from the default editor settings. It is important to understand what happens when we declare variables. So for example, I have a variable here that is assigning itself to the value true. This can cause problems later on. For example, what I could do is I could assign this value to also a float. I could assign it to a string. This can be useful to have a dynamic and flexible variable, but you'll find quite often this can cause bugs in larger workflows. We run this script and we'll see what happens. We'll see that first, the value is true. We print it. Then the value is the float. We printed it. And then also the string. Instead, what we can do is we can add a semicolon here. And what this does is assigns this variable to be a Boolean value, and it will only accept Boolean appropriate values going forward. So you can see it's already throwing an error. The string cannot be passed as a Boolean value. But you'll notice that the float value is not. It's good to note that anything that is above 0 will return a positive Boolean value, just for your information. So we go here. You can see here that anything that's positive has returned true. So true, 5.7 converted to Boolean is true, 0 converted to Boolean is false. Okay, so this is better. However, what we want to do now is write our declarations like this. So what this does, it makes our declaration of variables a little more efficient. So we are telling Godot directly what variable we are creating here, instead of us assigning a value to it and having to calculate and guess what variable we want to define. So that's one trick to make your variable declaration a little bit more efficient and less error prone going forward. Another useful tip is getting a faster reference to your nodes in your scene that you're working in. So for example, if I left click and drag, we get a direct reference to that node. Another thing you can do is you can drag with left click and then hold control and drop it down, and you'll get an on-ready variable declaration with reference to that node. While coding in Godot, you may get stuck on certain inbuilt functions that you're not sure what they do. What you can do is just hover over them and they'll give you a quick breakdown of what those functions do. If you want further information, you can hold control and left click, and that will open up the script for that function and more information inside. So you can see here, we've got our description for the function, all the context surrounding that as well. We can do this ourselves actually. We can make our own documentation comments. To do this, you just write a comment, but include an additional hashtag and write your description there. Now, when we look at our own functions, hover over them, we can see that documentation comment is there. And if we control left click, it'll again bring us to where that function is declared. So we already know that we can collapse our code by toggling this icon next to if statements and functions and loops. However, what if I wanted to create my own custom code region that I could collapse, say for example, this code here? What I could do is I could just write here, tag region, and then close it with a end region tag. And that would create your own region here, and you can name your region. So here we can see I can collapse that and I have my own region that's been created there. You could achieve the same effect by highlighting the code that you want to put in a region, right clicking, and then creating a code region. Additionally, you could do the shortcut Alt+R. Another tip that's quite handy for debugging your project is writing custom warnings and errors. So for example, in my code, I'm detecting if my raycast is colliding with something. I can do a warning or an error if it's not. So for example, let's go push warning, no object found. So if I run this, every tick now, my raycast is checking, and if there's no object found, it's printing an error message. Pretty extreme case, but you get the idea. What you can also do with this code is you can also push an error. So to push an error, say there's some fatal logic or flaw in the logic or something's occurred. What you can do is run this and it'll run in the debugger errors for you. What is also really useful is casting as an object type when we're assigning variables. For example, I'm getting an object from this method here. However, I want to access methods within Node2D. I know that Node2D, the child of the node class, which is a child of the object class. So I'm going to assign this as Node2D. Now, if this cast is not a valid Node2D object, I am checking here in object if it is valid or not. So now, if I didn't have this, and I tried to write functions like, oh, I want to call something I don't know, there's no autocomplete, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, does queue-free work, I'm not sure. Now, however, if I try to do that as a Node2D, you can see we have autocomplete here, so I can go queue-free, done. We also know that's a valid function for this class, so I'm not guessing by typing it by hand, and that's going to be less error prone as well. Say for example, I had a variable name and I wanted to change what it was called. I could change it here, objects, bool object, and do this one by one. However, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is highlight the selected term, hit Control D, Control D, Control D, and I can type all at once. Do be careful doing this, as if you miss other references to this variable name, or if it's in other scripts, this may cause errors. But that's just a cool, quick trick to edit your files a bit faster. Similarly, you can also click multiple lines of code at once. So say I'm here, here, and here. You can complete this by Alt plus left clicking. And that's how you write multiple lines of code at once. And for a bonus tip, what you can do is actually delay the ready function of a parent. As normally, what happens is the child calls their ready function and then the parent calls theirs. What you can do by adding this line of code is you can wait for the parent to call their ready function first, and then the child function will execute. This is useful if you're setting up game logic, or if there's variables you need to declare or functions you need to execute in the parent before you need to execute on the child, as again, by default, the child will execute. That is just a few of the tips and tricks I've picked up while playing around with Godot. If you found this helpful, let me know in the comments, and feel free to subscribe. More Godot content is coming out very soon. Thanks guys, bye.